Good morning, everyone, and thank you for joining us. This is a kind of experiment. Um, a few weeks ago, Ted Clausen sent me the lyrics to one of these songs by Lorenz Hart. And just not even as a suggestion, but just because he liked the lyrics so much, and I think found them complex and interesting and moving. And this subject of looking at song lyrics, lyrics to great songs, has been in the back of my mind for a long time. And so I think, well, we're we're supposed to talk about poetry. Uh and um and my question is, can we look at popular song lyrics? Uh can we look at them as poetry? And what happens when we do? Do they hold up as poetry even without the music, or especially without the music? Um, that's something that has been a question for me uh, for a very long time. I love popular music, and especially theater music, uh, and especially from a period of time going back to even before I was born. But music that I kind of grew up with. But what about the lyrics? And I've always loved the lyrics to these songs, but can we regard them? What happens when we regard them as poetry? Um, there are songs in Shakespeare's plays, and are can we regard those songs? Do we regard those songs as poetry, or as something else that's happening in the context of the great poetry of those plays? So that's sort of, I mean, that's maybe a subject for another discussion, but but that's sort of those are sort of the things that are going on in the back of my mind. Um, so what if let me read some of these lyrics, and I'm very eager to hear what you think and what you have to say about them. Um, Interesting that the ones that I chose, which are particular favorites of mine, are from a pretty narrow period of time, and late 30s. Um, and maybe that was 1940 is the latest, the most recent. And I mean, does that mean anything? Um, so the first one, which is the one that which is the lyrics that Ted sent to me a few weeks ago. Um, Glad to be unhappy, from the show On Your Toes. Um, Hart was, I'm sure you all know this, but Hart's musical partner was Richard Rodgers, and when Hart died, Richard Rodgers turned to Oscar Hammerstein, and for those famous songs of the 40s and 50s. Um, but glad to be unhappy from On Your Toes. I've also included I've also included the introductory verses to these songs, which even in the most famous songs even for the most famous songs, I think most people just don't know it all. And they're very interesting and important to the context of the songs and of the lyrics. Look at yourself. If you had a sense of humor, you would laugh to beat the band. Look at yourself. Do you still believe the rumor that romance is simply grand? Since you took it right on the chin, you have lost that bright toothpaste grin. My mental state is all a jumble. I sit around and sadly mumble. Fools rush in, so here am I. So here I am, very glad to be unhappy. I can't win, but here I am, more than glad to be unhappy. Unrequited love's a bore, and I've got it pretty bad. But for someone you adore, it's a pleasure to be sad. Like a straying baby lamb with no mammy and no pappy, I'm so unhappy. But oh, so glad.
Hmm.
Where or when? From Babes in Arms, 1937. When you're awake, I'm sorry, there's a typo in what I sent you, and you'll hear the correction in the second line. Dreams should be plural, not singular. When you're awake, the things you think come from the dreams you dream. Thought has wings, and lots of things are seldom what they seem. Sometimes you think you've lived before, all that you live today. Things you do come back to you as though they knew the way. Oh, the tricks your mind can play. It seems we stood and talked like this before. We looked at each other in the same way then, but I can't remember where or when. The clothes you're wearing are the clothes you wore. The smile you are smiling, you were smiling then, but I can't remember where or when. Some things that happened for the first time seem to be happening again. And so it seems that we have met before and laughed before and loved before. But who knows where or when? And we get another love song. Ah, I wish I were in love again. You don't know that I felt good when we up and parted. You don't know I knocked on wood, gladly broken-hearted. Worrying is through. I sleep all night, appetite and health restored. You don't know how much I'm bored. The sleepless nights, the daily fights, the quick toboggan when you reach the heights. I miss the kisses and I miss the bites. I wish I were in love again. The broken dates, the endless waits, the lovely loving and the hateful hates, the conversation with the flying plates. I wish I were in love again. No more pain, no more strain. Now I'm sane, but I would rather be gaga. The pulled out fur of cat and cur, the fine mismating of a him and her. I've learned my lesson, and I wish I were in love again. The furtive sigh, the blackened eye, the words, I'll love you till the day I die. the self-deception that believes the lie. I wish I were in love again. When love congeals, it soon reveals the faint aroma of performing seals, the double crossing of a pair of heels. I wish I were in love again. No more care, no despair. I'm all there now, but I'd rather be punch drunk. Believe me, sir, I much prefer the classic battle of a him and her. I don't like quiet, and I wish I were in love again. So, two more. My Funny Valentine. This is surely the most famous of these lyrics, also from the show Babes in Arms from 1937. Just imagine going to a Broadway show for the first time in 1937 and hearing these amazing songs. The Lady is a Tramp was from that show. Song called Johnny One Note, not so well known, but it also just the level of the songwriting was had to have been astonishing. My Funny Valentine. And I just a little context. One of the characters' names was Valentine, and the heroine of the show is singing this song to Valentine. Behold the way our fine feathered friend his virtue doth parade. Thou knowest not, my dim-witted friend, the picture thou hast made. Thy vacant brow and thy tousled hair conceal thy good intent. Thou noble, upright, truthful, sincere, and slightly dopey gent. You're my funny Valentine, sweet, comic Valentine. You make me smile with my heart. Your looks are laughable, unphotographable, yet you're my favorite work of art. Is your figure less than Greek? Is your mouth a little weak? When you open it to speak, are you smart? But don't change a hair for me, not if you care for me. Stay, little Valentine, stay. Each day is Valentine's Day. And I'll read the last one. It never entered my mind from Higher and Higher, 1940. I don't care if there's powder on my face. I don't care if there's powder on my nose. I don't care if my hairdo is in place. I've lost the very meaning of repose. I never put a mud pack on my face. Oh, who'd have thought that I'd walk in a daze now? I never go to shows at night, but just to matinees now. I see the show, and home I go. Once I laughed when I heard you saying that I'd be playing solitaire, uneasy in my easy chair. It never entered my mind. Once you told me I was mistaken, that I'd awaken with the sun and order orange juice for one. It never entered my mind. You had what I lack myself. And now I even have to scratch my back myself. Once you warned me that if you scorn me, I'd sing the maiden's prayer again and wish that you were there again to get into my hair again. It never entered my mind.
Bravo.
I encourage you to read these. Thank you, to read these lyrics out loud.
Yeah.
Even without the music. So, what do you think, Denise?
I just think this is the best reading I've ever heard from you. I think you live those poems. You inhabit them.
Well,
They're your lingo.
well,
And I think it's really entered your DNA in a way, even to say that there is a relationship between that and your poetry.
Mm.
hmm, um, I take that as a compliment.
It's a compliment. Well, I
Oh
mean it
yeah,
as a compliment. I hope it's understood as a compliment. Some people would think that if the artist is nourished by the things coming from the popular arts, that's inferior. They should look at some Bach and Mozart and Beethoven and Schubert, and they'll see that it's one of the strengths.
thank you, Denise. You had your hand up.
Yeah, I I feel that these are poems, and in a lot of cases, they're better poems than, say, you know, Dor- Dorothy Parker is known for some of her best snappy little, quatrains or couplets, but a lot of her poetry is sad girl poetry
Hmm,
about unrequited love. And some of it, has a rueful or wry turn, though not comic. And of course, they're all in form and they all rhyme, but they don't have the syncopation of rhyme or the complexity of emotion. Um, or the vocabulary of these poems, um, which which struggle with paradox.
yeah, I think some of her best poems are really, ins let's say, inspired by the popular songs by Lawrence Hart and Ira Gershwin and Irving Berlin. Um, who am I leaving out? But yeah, yeah. Bill Symes, I'm very interested as always to know whether these songs are known on your side of the Atlantic.
Um, the only one I knew was Funny
Funny
Valentine.
Valentine.
So that put me, in a sense, in quite a good position to judge whether they're good as
Yeah.
poems because I didn't have to suffer the interference of the music intruding into my mind. I've got a feeling, though, that probably other Englishmen might be more familiar with them than me. Certainly, people slightly older than me might.
Yes.
Um, uh, I think I've never particularly had much interest in musicals, so it's probably the case that I've neglected them, whereas other people with a greater interest in that form might well be aware of them.
Sure.
Um, uh, yeah, I mean, I enjoyed them, and I think they're very witty and they're very clever, and the way he generates rhymes to solve problems is remarkable. I do think they possibly betray their origins as lyrics to songs
Mm.
because of a certain upper limit to the level of complexity and they can admit. I mean, I think, are they not in a sense conditioned by the thought that um, the meanings have to be immediately apprehensible? Of course, you can go back and listen to a song a second time. So if you think you've missed something, you can certainly give yourself another chance to catch it. But I think he's probably trying to make all the meanings immediately available, and that possibly
Mm.
allies him to one particular brand of poetry and not perhaps to the highest kind, but
Mhm.
I don't know whether I'm doing him a disservice. I mean, it seems to me that the poetry world has many mansions, and one doesn't necessarily depreciate a certain kind of art to say that it's not comparable to another kind. I mean, I think it's simply the case that it's trying to do something else.
Yeah, yeah. No, I wouldn't argue with any of your points. But I was so interested to know whether how much of these lyrics were known outside of this country. Wendell?
then,
There you are.
I'm interested in the implicit that, especially in the first one, I Wish I Were in Love Again, the implicit feeling that love, as he's talking about it, is necessarily involves an abusive relationship. The conversation with flying plates
Hmm.
doesn't sound very affectionate to me.
Well,
But acceptable to his audience.
the blackened eye.
Yes. Yeah.
Um, Susan and then Denise.
yeah, I know these songs backwards and forwards, and I can sing them even. But the other agenda is the song has to advance the plot of the show.
Mhm.
So when you have a plain poem, I think you have just freedom for it to be what it wants to be. But this, or maybe I'm wrong, I think this has like an agenda, but they're fabulous songs. I loved hearing them. And it's very hard for me to hear the words without the music in my
Sure.
head
Yeah.
and the ta-da, 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 you know.
Right. 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 As for me, I mean, I'm really trying to read them aloud, which is very interesting. As I say, I encourage you to read these aloud. And it's really and for me, I'm sort of fighting the music that I hear
Yeah,
in my
right.
head. Denise, and then Jonathan, and then Catherine.
Thank you. A couple points. First of all, about constraint is, I think if you write in form, even some of the time, you'd have to recognize that anytime you write in form, you're constraining yourself. You may not be advancing a plot, but you are demanding a certain kind of pattern, a certain kind of, if you're doing rhyme, a certain kind of vocabulary. And, if it's narrative poetry, then the whole thing is advancement of plot. And as far as the language being immediately comprehensible, in some cases in these songs, that's true. But, I think the quick toboggan when you reach the heights is not transparent on first hearing, and you have to think about it. And the wonderful when love congeals, and you have to think about that too. It soon reveals, and then you've got the faint aroma of performing seals. Now that you really do have to think about, and then followed by the double crossing of a pair of eels. It's wonderful imagery, and you have to think about how it relates to this, slippery idea of love, which keeps form shifting, shape shifting. So to me, these have a a complexity. And, you know, even the ones that seem simpler have this sort of, as I think I said before, grappling with paradox that I don't find so much in a lot of poetry, which tends to be built on sort of more popular assumptions, and lacks ambiguity and nuance. Anyway, that's it. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Jonathan. And then Ellen and Jim.
2 brief points. I have to disagree with Susan saying that these songs are intended to advance a plot. I think that immediately after Lorenz Hart died, that Hammerstein was working on Oklahoma, and that was really the first American musical where the music really was intended to push forward a storyline. These we don't know the stories to these musicals because they didn't really have one. I mean, they were much closer to being reviews than stories, or if there were stories, they were very simple ones.
Some of them. I didn't the last show that Rodgers and Hart, well, the last 2 shows that they did together were really were more real stories than some of these earlier ones. The lyrics that we're thinking about today really are not so much shows that advance the plot. There are almost no plots in these shows. But they did see. As someone very interested in the history of musical theater, I don't think Rodgers and Hammerstein invented the plot-driven musical, and the music always advanced the plot. I think it actually happened before then, but they certainly consolidated that. I think.
Another thing that we're looking at here is that these songs were, I'm guessing that they were all published as sheet music.
Yeah,
and
I'm
they
sure
were much more tied with being popular songs than
Right.
what we see on Broadway now.
Yeah. Well, for lots of reasons, and
Yeah.
some good ones. Jim and Ellen.
I'm with you on loving this, and I thank you for this. It's just a delight. And one of the things that is giving me a lot of pleasure is the nuance and sophistication, both in the rhyme schemes and I'm in the emotions expressed, and I'm feeling like this is carried on more to a later extent recently with particularly Sondheim. I'm thinking, you're always sorry, you're always grateful. Yeah.
Yeah. Thank you, Bill.
One way of thinking about the content is to think that he's actually not writing about love, he's writing about passion. But passion doesn't work as well in the scansion of the rhyme.
In terms of,
sorry.
Yeah, you're dropping out a little bit, but what I'm hearing you say is that he's really talking about passion, not love, but that passion doesn't scan as well as as love. Denise,
or rhyme.
A rhyme, yeah, right. Denise, you're
muted, Denise.
I think the word love in popular song, even into the 1960s, is a euphemism for a lot of things: passion, sex.
Sex.
Yeah. And yeah, irrational attraction, you know, every kind of desire. So it's shorthand so that the children won't understand.
Good point. Good point. Um, uh, Ted, would you mind just telling us why you sent me the lyrics to Glad to Be Unhappy? How did you find them, for one thing?
Well, I'm a real fan of this period of song, but actually, all of you are to blame for the reason that I sent Lloyd the lyrics, because on my daily bike rides, I've been listening to our past conversations. And one of our conversations was Keats's Melancholy. And when I heard this song sung by some chanteuse, I thought, oh, how contemporary and how interesting to be glad to be unhappy, for example. And, you know, where is that? Let's see. Fools, I'm sorry.
Okay.
But oh so glad, I'm so unhappy, but oh so glad. So that you're all to sort of blame for me sending this to Lloyd.
Okay, I think you can all take credit for that. Catherine, yeah.
A couple of things. These are particularly American, I think, not English. And one of the things that people tease Americans about, if you're is our bad grammar. And these say, I wish I were in love again, not I wish I was in love again, which is what people would say, Americans would always say, because we don't know any better. So I think these are particularly being American, but being okay in a sort of, we can do this. And I think I've thought about, people have asked me why I think people write poetry. And I said, you know, if I knew what a poem was, I might try it. But since it's unclear to me, I wouldn't touch it. And they didn't care about that. They let the lines go over the line rather than stopping with a rhyme. They picked images that were not pastoral, by which I mean, but they're not about butterflies and, you know, the sheep and all that English poetry of nature. And I think that there's partly that. Of course, I know these inside out and back from Ella Fitzgerald's great the Rodgers and Hart songbook, those recordings. And if you know them, there's no way you ever get them out of your head.
Right.
Yeah. Well, I totally agree with you about that.
And I think that there's something in the American, certainly in the 30s after World War I, a stubbornness that we're okay. And we have a part in not only the financial and military worlds, but maybe in the intellectual worlds. And this is how we do it. And you know, and whether they did it consciously or not, I suspect a little that they were using words that were just right, rather than being treated as the simplistic younger cousins all the time, which I think a lot of English criticism has made out of American literature. I remember a friend of my mother's who was English and was a translator and wrote a couple of English novels, said one night when we were visiting her in England, but there is no American fiction, is there? Which took my mother on a life's campaign to fill in her gas. But there was some of that, and that was in the 50s. So there's that. And I think they've sort of broken the traditional form by running over the line, by making them not in an obvious form, but sort of. They have rhymes, but not there and there.
Yeah.
Rhymes like there and there. And Rogers and Hammerstein, I think, had a whole different agenda. They were talking about social causes. And if you see one of them, that's not immediately apparent. When you see three of them, it's immediately apparent. And that's not here at all. Just
right. Right.
And I love these. I love them.
Yeah. Bill, I wonder. Oh. Bill, could you just say it in case we missed your chat comment? Bill Bennett.
I wonder if Bill has a good connection because he got a
Oh,
little.
yeah, maybe not. It looks like you're outdoors also.
Yeah.
Yeah, the question was, would
Well-
we remember the words to Winterreise if Schubert hadn't set them?
Right.
And-
I'm sorry, I got lost by accidentally minimizing Zoom and then I couldn't get back in.
Oh, there you are, but good.
Yeah.
Am I
Yeah.
saying what you said? Yeah. Yeah, I'm actually someone who likes those poems. I think the settings are sublime, but I actually like the poems. So I may be the wrong person to discuss that with. Oh, Yehudi, yeah.
Yeah, can you talk to me about the word gaga and
Yes.
the suggestion of black inflection on mammy and daddy, which is
Happy.
Oh, Mammy and Pappy.
mammy and pappy. That's hardly vernacular English or American. It's black.
Hmm.
And we have that in Summertime of Gershwin, Ira Gershwin. But especially Gaga. I mean, that's part of the American vernacular, of course.
Yeah.
So are some of the other expressions in there that seem rather dissonant and one would think not particularly poetic.
And to reinforce your point, I mean, I think Pappy, Mammy and Pappy is that he's looking for a rhyme with glad to be unhappy. And that's the primary source of that. I think that's such an odd line. So I'm not sure. I wouldn't go as far as you're going with that. The Gaga I find fascinating because it doesn't rhyme. And that he does that. I mean, it's one of the interesting things. One of the interesting things in I Wish I Were in Love Again are these moments where you're expecting a rhyme and don't get one. And so the Gaga and Punch Drunk, which is in the same kind of stanza, are really, they're kind of pulling the rug out from under. And they're kind of I think they're sort of, I mean, this may be getting a little too high flown, but that they're sort of embodying in the rhyme and the stanza form the way that our expectations are undermined. So no more pain, no more strain. Now I'm saying, I mean, we're getting all these rhymes, 3 rhymes. Now I'm saying, but I would rather be Gaga. And then Gaga doesn't rhyme with anything. And it's a kind of embodiment of this state of, disorientation. And the same thing happens in that parallel stanza near the end of the song, near the end of the poem. No more care, no despair. I'm all there now, but I'd rather be punch drunk. And it's interesting to hear various people who are singing this song and the way that I mean, Ella Fitzgerald doesn't do it, but a lot of other people, a lot of other singers do. I would rather be Gaga or punch drunk, or, they'll kind of act it out. But it's sort of doing something. And I have to say, it's one of the things that I love about all of these lyrics is that they are, well, they fill your expectations and then they undermine them. And that Hart really feels free to do that. And then, and of course Rogers went along with that in a kind of wonderful way. So that these rhythmic surprises, and oral surprises, just the way the rhymes fall out, and then the way they fall out in ways that are really unexpected. And I think that's very sophisticated. It's very sophisticated lyric writing. And that he is, he's using he's almost referencing traditional poetic form by undermining traditional poetic form. I don't know if that makes sense, but I'm trying to. I'm trying to. Yeah, Bill.
If one were to try and put the opposite case, I mean, I think most people here have been, as you were just a moment ago, highlighting features which buttress the case for their poeticity, for their autonomous existence on the page, and their non-reliance on the music. But if one wanted to try and argue that they do betray their origins in song and their appearance in musicals, would one be justified, do you think, in pointing to the fact that they are more permissive when it comes to cliched expressions? I wonder if I'm not knowing them as well as other people, I can't instantly call to, well, maybe the first one, laugh to beat the band.
Yes.
That romance is simply grand. I mean, when Denise started the case for the complexity and the subtlety and sophistication of these songs, she pointed to, the toboggan line or the congealed image, and she was quite right, of course, but one would have more trouble justifying lines like the ones I've just quoted.
Yeah.
And would a poet sort of, who's putting words on a page and not without the accompaniment of music, feel that he or she couldn't get away with lines like that, which are, as it were, fillers in comparison to the lines quoted by Denise.
You know, I mean, I think that's a point that's very well taken. Um, and you're I wouldn't disagree with you, except that I think that in a way, when I read those lines, I read those cliches almost in quotes, in quotation marks.
Ah, yes, okay, yeah.
And I know, you know, my impulse is to justify these the these tricks and this idiom. There's no question that he is writing, you know, these are in a kind of popular idiom. And but that he also, I mean, to beat the band, I I mean it's now it's a sort of dead cliche because no one even knows what that means anymore.
Right.
The suggestion of black inflection on Mammy and Daddy, which is
Happy.
Oh, Mammy and Pappy.
Mammy and Pappy, that's hardly vernacular English or American. It's black.
Hmm.
And you know, we have that in Summertime of Gershwin, Ira Gershwin.
Oh.
But especially Gaga. I mean, that's part of the American vernacular, of course.
Yeah.
So are some of the other expressions in there that seem rather dissonant and one would think not particularly poetic.
And to reinforce your point, I mean, I think Pappy, Mammy and Pappy is that he's looking for a rhyme with glad to be unhappy. And that's the primary source of that. I think that's such an odd line. And so I'm not sure. I wouldn't go as far as you're going with that. The Gaga I find fascinating because it doesn't rhyme. And that he does that. I mean, it's one of the interesting things. One of the interesting things in I Wish I Were in Love Again are these moments where you're expecting a rhyme and don't get one. And so the Gaga and Punch Drunk, which is in the same kind of stanza, are really, they're kind of pulling the rug out from under. And they're kind of I think they're sort of, I mean, this may be getting a little too high flown, but that they're sort of embodying in the rhyme and the stanza form the way that our expectations are undermined. So no more pain, no more strain. Now I'm saying, I mean, we're getting all these rhymes, 3 rhymes. Now I'm saying, but I would rather be Gaga. And then Gaga doesn't rhyme with anything. And it's a kind of embodiment of this state of, you know, disorientation. And the same thing happens in that parallel stanza near the end of the song, near the end of the poem. No more care, no despair. I'm all there now, but I'd rather be punch drunk. And it's interesting to hear various people who are singing this song and the way that I mean, Ella Fitzgerald doesn't do it, but a lot of other people, a lot of other singers do. I would rather be gaga or punch drunk, or, they'll kind of act it out. But it's sort of doing something. And I have to say, it's one of the things that I love about all of these lyrics is that they are, well, they fill your expectations and then they undermine them. And that Hart really feels free to do that. And then, and of course Rogers went along with that in a kind of wonderful way. So that these rhythmic surprises, I and oral surprises, just the way the rhymes fall out, and then the way they fall out in ways that don't that are really unexpected. And I think that's very sophisticated. It's very sophisticated lyric writing. And that he is, he's using he's almost referencing traditional poetic form by undermining traditional poetic form. I don't know if that makes sense, but I'm trying to I'm trying to. Yeah, Bill.
If one were to try and put the opposite case, I mean, I think most people here have been, as you were just a moment ago, highlighting features which buttress the case for their poeticity, for their autonomous existence on the page, and their non-reliance on the music. But if one wanted to try and argue that they do betray their origins in song and their appearance in musicals, would one be justified, do you think, in pointing to the fact that they are more permissive when it comes to cliched expressions? I wonder if I'm not knowing them as well as other people, I can't instantly call to, well, maybe the first one, laugh to beat the band.
Yes.
That romance is simply grand. I mean, when Denise started the case for the complexity and the subtlety and sophistication of these songs, she pointed to, the toboggan line or the congealed image, and she was quite right, of course, but one would have more trouble justifying lines like the ones I've just quoted.
Yeah.
And would a poet sort of, who's putting words on a page and not without the accompaniment of music, feel that he or she couldn't get away with lines like that, which are, as it were, fillers in comparison to the lines quoted by Denise?
I mean, I think that's a point that's very well taken. And I wouldn't disagree with you, except that I think that in a way, when I read those lines, I read those cliches almost in quotes, in quotation marks.
Yes, okay, yeah.
And I know, my impulse is to justify these tricks and this idiom. There's no question that he is writing, these are in a kind of popular idiom. But that he also, I mean, to beat the band, I mean, it's now it's a sort of dead cliche because no one even knows what that means anymore.
Right.
But we've heard people say it, and when I read those in the poem, I mean, and it's very interesting to read these lyrics out loud without the music, but that I hear them in, yeah, this is what people say. But then he'll also say the quick toboggan when you reach the heights. And that's an extraordinary image. And I totally agree with Denise. I think it's one of the great lines in certainly in song lyrics. My other, I think my other sort of example of a great moment, and maybe the greatest moment in all of these songs, is um uh the furtive sigh, the blackened eye, the words I love you till the day I die, the self-deception that believes the lie. And I almost don't know another moment in popular song lyrics that goes that deeply into the complexity of that particular feeling. And I think that's extraordinary. And that it might not happen in a poem if you were writing a sonnet, but that it happens in these lyrics, and that I just get chills when I read or hear that line. Susan, your hand is up.
Before,
Yeah.
or Susan, I don't want you to lose that thought, but Lloyd, just as what you're saying, there was a comment in the chat
Oh,
that
I missed it.
that amplifies that. And Sharon said that the Hays Code was implemented in 1934, just 3 years prior to these songs. And she agrees with Denise's insight that the language is euphemistic and also covertly suggested by images of toboggan heights, performing seals, and pair of heels. And she says much less overt than Shakespearean beasts with two backs. So I just wanted to get that in because it
Oh,
amplifies
thank
what you're
you.
saying.
Yeah, no, I missed it. I'm not very good at seeing the chats because I'm trying to look at so many different different
I feel the same, and
pages.
if people feel compelled to speak up, but thank you, and I'm sorry, Susan, I want to hear what you have to
No,
say.
that's okay. I'm just curious, which comes first, the music and then the lyric? How does it all work?
You
Because
know,
if you've got da 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 da, then you're having to match lyrics to that, right?
you
Yeah,
know,
I do get that.
there is a film, a short film. It's on YouTube, made in the early 30s, I think, fairly early on, with Rogers and Hart.
Ah,
And it's it's sort of it's sort of awful because they're trying to be funny, but they're also very stiff because they don't, they don't know how to talk to a camera. But one of their jokes is about which came first, the music or the lyrics. And they're very slippery about answering that. And they were a team. I think mainly the lyrics came first with them, but not always. And they make a kind of joke about that. When
This is to maybe backtrack too far, but I think given the time frame of these songs, you couldn't have said Mammy and Pappy without having Al Jolson somewhere in the background.
Yeah.
Yeah. Pappy, not so much, but certainly Mammy.
Yeah.
Hmm.
Catherine.
And all of that, the tolerance of blackface, and is this a comment? Would it be a comment that, just kind of passive acceptance, or given how Rogers ends up and he's working with Hart, is it a early pointing in the other direction?
Pointing in which direction? I'm
Well,
away from
away
Jolson.
from that. That is to say, it's like let's look at this just a little.
Yeah. I would even say I'm not even sure look at is I mean I think they don't do this. I don't know any other place in Hart's lyrics where even this issue would come up. And I think it's just as I say, I think it's there for the rhyme, and that it goes by very, very, very quickly. I don't know another place where there's anything like that.
It's our hypersensitivity, or mine.
Yeah, maybe. Yeah, I would say our. Yeah. Catherine.
These were written 87 years ago. I would think that some of the phrases in it have gotten to be cliches rather than that they were cliches.
Mhm.
I think those of us who know these inside out and backwards, or even just have heard them a long time repeated, that they became cliches because everybody could sing them.
Yeah.
I mean, it's almost 100 years ago. These are
Almost,
quite
yeah.
remarkable.
Isn't that amazing?
Yeah. I mean, because they're very fresh. And I think of Dorothy L. Sayers' mystery, Murder Must Advertise, about advertising language and how that got into common parlance. And that also seems quite fresh. And that's way old too.
Yeah. Ted.
Thank you. I have a question about
Thank you.
where or when.
Ah.
I find the lyrics to this song very compelling.
Mm-hmm.
And between our dream life and our living life. And I feel like they flow in and out of each other, trying to make sense of the way our world sort of works. So they have this between quality to me, this very dreamlike quality of really asking a lot of questions without any question marks. And I'm wondering if anyone can provide me with the context in the play for what I think are really very incredible lyrics.
From what I know, I think we can't take the context too seriously. There's a movie of Babes in Arms, Judy Garland and Mickey Rooney movie. I don't know how close that is to the Broadway show, but I think it's close enough that we know that the plot of Babes in Arms is, hey kids, let's put on our own show. And that there's very little plot and presumably very little characterization, but a great platform to, I mean, I think the score to that show is just one of the greatest musical it's one of the greatest scaffolds for in American theater for these amazing popular songs. And there are 5 or 6 songs that have become standards and that are some of the best songs ever written for Broadway. But they have very little to do with plot or character. And that the complexity of feeling is all in, I mean, and this is where you can argue about that this is where you can argue about the difference between Rodgers and Hart shows and Rodgers and Hammerstein shows where the plot and character are in the script and the songs sort of reflect that, maybe further the plot. And that the Rodgers and Hart shows, except for the very last ones, which have real stories to them, the songs themselves contain the emotional complexity and intellectual, the wit of those lyrics have more to do, are more self-contained. And I really prefer that, I have to admit. Denise and then Catherine. And I also have a question for Susan. And I'm trying to read Bill's comments. I want to go back to that, Bill, if we can, but Denise and then Catherine, and then I have a question for Susan.
I just looked up, ma'am.
Today's serve
Oh,
experience
sorry.
menu is here, which means you can get a tall hot or iced coffee or tea with a breakfast sandwich starting at $6.
I don't know what that was. Denise.
Yeah, I just looked up mammy in the OED, and it's defined as a child's word for mother. And the first instance of it is late 16th century. So whatever has happened to it since, it's got very old origins.
I didn't know that.
Neither.
Yeah, wow. Catherine?
If one is thinking about what was in the air that these guys might have been thinking about as they wrote, and the where or when is very Freudian. It's that mixture, and that certainly was in the air in that period. And didn't one of these guys, was it Cole Porter, who died of a brain tumor after long years of psychoanalysis, which apparently didn't cure his brain tumor, and he never saw a real doctor.
That was George Gershwin.
It was Gershwin.
Yeah,
But
right.
I knew one of those guys was very much involved in that, so it must have been in that group's common parlance, maybe.
Yeah, it had to be an issue that was. I don't think Hart invented this idea.
No.
I mean, déjà vu, which is really kind of what this song is about, goes back a long time. Susan, my question for you is that I know this isn't the music that you're known for, but did you ever get a chance to sing these songs?
Is this to me?
Yeah.
Or Susan
No,
Weiner? Oh, to
Susan
me.
Weiner.
Yeah,
Oh,
absolutely.
oh, I didn't, Lloyd, and I did have an opportunity in California with the famous Johnny Green,
Oh my.
who invited me to come just sing over his shoulder some things, and he found me fascinating because I had none of the tropes or the usual mannerisms of popular singers, and he wanted to take me all around the country doing these things.
Oh.
And my manager said, no, 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 no. But I'm very struck by how wonderfully singable these lyrics are, and the way they allow vowels and character of words to speak quickly and be heard, and the internal rhymes and then the surprises are so well worked out that it would be a joy to sing them on any pitches and any way, which is certainly characteristic of their skills. But I did not know the songs, so it's been fascinating for me.
Yeah, I was wondering how conscious you were of these songs. Uh, um,
I knew My Funny Valentine
sure.
and all
Yeah.
of that, of course, but
Yeah. Yeah. One of the great joys I've had as a critic was I was an enormous admirer of the soprano Phyllis Curtin, who became the dean of the music school at Boston University. And very, very late in her career, I assume she did this in private, but but later on, she sang Cole Porter, and and there's a classical musicians, classical singers take a big risk when they sing American popular music, and how to do it without sounding
Awful.
awful. Yes, that's the word. The person who really does it well now, who has someone with with a real voice, who does it now and does it brilliantly, is Audra McDonald. But Phyllis Curtin was one of these classical musicians who really sort of got the tone right, and who could sing at least in the Cole Porter songs that I heard, who could sing them with real feeling without sounding like an opera singer condescending to sing popular music. I think there were some hands up, and maybe some comments in the chat that I have also missed.
Lloyd?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
A couple of people who are have been in our lifetime. Flicka, Frederica von Stade, came out of clubs, and so did Dawn Upshaw.
Yeah.
And so they're very familiar and very easy in the vernacular style. They can do that without posturing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. I could name some people who can't do that without posturing, but I won't. Any other Stephen, you have a new poem that quotes from where or when. And what was your impulse in including that reference in you? I hope you don't mind my asking. You don't have to answer if it's too if
No,
it's
it was actually very practical. I went to a memorial service. The poem I changed and made it to be something else, but I went to a memorial service, and the husband of a friend who had passed away loved show tunes, and they sang show tunes at his memorial service.
Hmm.
And it was interesting, as one of the friends who was there said, you know, when else do you go to a funereal event that begins with somebody playing "Oh, What a Beautiful Morning"? And
That's great.
the two of the children sang a couple of Rogers and Hart songs, but then they didn't sing it. But the pianist played this song, and it was in my head, and I knew something was going on. And so when I got home, the poem was just a way of saying older popular songs carry segments of a life.
Mhm.
And I was trying to, in a sense,
Yeah.
imagine somebody else's life, and therefore the music would flow in and out of that too. And then of course the delight is, because we know song lyrics so well, we can play off of them, we can change the meanings, we can run counter to them. You know, it's one of the few places we can understand allusion, because you know, at one time when you expected everybody to have read the same books, you could allude to things, but there's very little of that except in pop songs, pop culture. So you can allude to that and know that generally people are going to respond.
Thank you. Yeah, you do it very beautifully in your poem.
Can I add a comment I was just thinking about too?
Sure.
I very much agree with Bill's take on the fact that some of this, if you were a poetry teacher and someone handed in the poem, you'd really would love certain pieces of them, but you'd really be critical of certain pieces. And they're in the same one, you know, in the same poem, the same lyric, there'll be an astonishing line and then a line that feels a little bit hackneyed. And you know, the old Frost thing, he said, you're supposed to not be able to tell which came first, which of the rhymes came first. And in some of these lines like Mammy and Pappy, you know which came first. You know that he's aiming to something, and therefore the rhyme is just serviceable. And that would be a lack, that would be a problem. But I was going to say, in the larger context, it's as if this becomes the atmosphere that our brains can swim in. And I've always argued that the reason we had such great poetry in the 60s and the 70s was because we grew up listening to, you know, Paul Simon and Lennon and McCartney and Joni Mitchell and people like that. So in a sense, the popular song becomes this large cultural ocean, you know, from which then we can grab pieces and go where we need to go. I think these popular songwriters wanted it to be for everybody in the ocean, and some more, you know, elite poets perhaps are happy to do something that only a very small, you know, school of fish are going to react to it in that way too. So I grew up also inheriting these. I wasn't old enough to see them when they first came out, but watching old movies and things on TV, inheriting my parents' generation for how these songs worked, and they became formative in the back of my mind as well.
I have a couple of things. Oh, Denise, go ahead.
This is going back to an a sense that the idea of love expressed in, at least I Wish I Were in Love Again, involves domestic violence, though it doesn't say who's throwing the plates. And so I picked up Dorothy Parker again from 1926, two poems that face each other. One ends with 3 things I shall have till I die: laughter and hope and a sock in the eye. And then opposite, a lady in love is more frequently decidedly Dutch. The best that she gets is a sock in the nose, which is a comparison to this literary conception of a lady gone reckless in love in novels and plays. You watch her proceed in a drapery of roseate haze. So the the idea that that relations between men and women involve physical violence appears just on two random pages that I opened up. So a cultural artifact, I guess.
Yeah. Thank you. Thank you. I want to say a couple of things. We do have to end on time today, so I just want to get this in. One of the things that we didn't say, and I think Ted's instinct for sending glad to be unhappy and what that poem is doing in maybe in the most explicit way of all these poems, and this kind of complicated mixture of feeling. But to go back to the mammy and pappy line, I mean, it, in some ways, it's not my favorite, or one of my least favorite lines in all of these poems, but I think it's doing something in the poem. And what it's doing is that, I mean, what's the image? He's talking about this feeling of unrequited love makes him feel not just being someone in love and having his love unrequited, but of being an orphan.
Yeah.
And so there's some power in that image. And as I said, I'm not absolutely crazy about the phrasing, but there's some meaning in there, and that one of the things that you get, one of the things that I get from reading these poems without trying not to hear the music, which I also love, but trying not to hear the music, is really how moving they are. And that the look at the last stanza of Where or When, and how skillfully, I mean, that it changes from the stanza form you expect. It seems we stood and talked like this before. This is earlier. That was the beginning of the actual song. It seems we've stood and talked like this before. We looked at each other in the same way then, but I can't remember where or when. And then look at what happens at the end. And so it seems that we have met before, and laughed before, and loved before, but who knows where or when. And that sequence, which changes the rhythm of the stanza, I find that the intrusion of "and laughed before" I find that, and loved before, I find that very moving, and that I do get a picture of a relationship, of a pre-existing relationship, I guess, that may be part of their current relationship, that is it's extremely touching, that they're not just in love, but they're really enjoying each other, or enjoying something. And I find that very poignant. I find that very touching. And I think that's all the way through these poems. And that I just want to say, and that making a joke out of something that's really underlying the joke is some real sadness. And I think I think that also makes, I think that makes Hart, at the very least, a great lyricist, and that the lyrics are, if they're not poems, if they're not independent of the music, that they are bringing something from the world of great poetry. They're bringing some real, not just sort of ephemeral or casual, you know, love lyrics, cliches, if you will. They're not just bringing that into the poem, but they're bringing real feeling into the poem, into the song. And that the complication comes from, well, I'm sort of making a joke out of it, but underlying it, once you told me I was mistaken, that I'd awaken with the sun and order orange juice for one. And what a marvelous image that is. How, I mean, I would encourage my writing students, I would have encouraged my writing students to write a line that had that kind of specificity of experience to it. And then of course, the title is a cliche. It never entered my mind. But then it seems to me the cliche becomes very real in the course of the lyrics. And that the kind of this sense of being lost or betrayed possibly, or whatever it was that ended this relationship, and that took the singer, the speaker, completely by surprise.
Get the onion.
Feels, I'm sorry, Jim, yes. Go ahead.
Yeah, I just wanted to underline also what you've been saying. I've found these extraordinarily moving, and I don't know if others have felt the same way. Many of them have brought tears to my eyes as we read it and listened and talked about it.
Yeah. I think one interesting thing, just a second. I think one interesting thing that we haven't really spoken of, is the gender of the singer. And that for the most part, it could be a man or a woman, and maybe we even assume it's a man because it's written by Lawrence Hart. But it never entered my mind, really has to be a woman. And she doesn't care if her hairdo is in place or if there's powder on her nose, and she stops putting a mud pack on her. I mean, it's kind of silly, but it also establishes the gender of the singer and or the speaker. And then that relationship which suggests that she was actually warned by her lover that this is what was going to happen, and that it never entered my mind that it would, and how really kind of complicated and upsetting that is. You had your hand up.
Well, I was just thinking that where or when connects with the mystical process we're involved in. That I don't know how many people with whom I've had affectionate relationships that were somehow imperfect, that I would like another lifetime to be able to do it right. Or and people that I have relationships with where I say, oh, we're just continuing a conversation that started a long time ago and will never be completed. And that's the relationship I have with Keats and with Yeats. I once felt possessed by Yeats while reciting him, which is something Yeats would claim to be capable of doing, by the way.
Right. Right. I think you need to write a love song. Any last comments? I know this is a busy and complicated day for Marita. Jane, yeah. You're muted. Please, yeah.
Yeah, I loved this. And I had to run out because something suddenly happened, but I really loved this. And I too, I guess was it Bill who just said the business about tears? I found a lot of them very, I wound up being very teary. I mean, they're deeply moving,
Yeah.
and they're very smart. They're extremely smart.
And they're very smart. Yeah.
Yeah. And I forgot about them. So it was great to hear you read them. You read them very nicely.
Oh,
And
thank you. I tried.
yeah, and to hear also people's comments. So I just wanted to say that I didn't know whether I was fully in this Zoom because I'm having trouble getting on.
Oh.
So yeah, so that's why I kept thinking I want to raise my hand, but no, I don't know whether I'm here.
You are very here. You are very present right now.
Thank you.
And
but it was lovely. I'm really happy to have heard these things.
Thank you. And really, Ted, thank you so much for triggering this discussion. And as always, Marita, thank you so much. I should say that we're not absolutely sure yet, but we may be on vacation for the rest of the summer. So it might not be until September. We'll let you know, of course, but it might not be until September that we have our next discussion. And Ted, if you have any suggestions, I am very open to them. And Marita, thank you again for welcoming us. I'm so grateful to you. I think we all are.
Oh, it's my pleasure. And this was such a great discussion. And I'm going to go read these out loud at home. And
do. Good.
And Ted, thank you so much. You guys, this is always wonderful. So, and I'll send a message out next week with the recording, and stay tuned. And Lloyd and I'll be talking more about the next program. Take care. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.